The quantum drives of the Concordia hummed with barely contained energy as the massive diplomatic vessel carved its path through the starlit void between the Terran coalition and the Outer Rim territories. Captain Alina Rodriguez stood on the bridge, her weathered hands gripping the command rail with white-knuckled intensity that had nothing to do with the smooth flight through hyperspace. 3 days until first contact with the Zephyrian Empire, and her crew was already showing signs of pre-diplomatic stress syndrome, a condition that seemed to manifest primarily through excessive coffee consumption and the peculiar habit of polishing already spotless equipment. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Hayes called from the communications station, his voice carrying the particular strain of someone who'd been rehearsing the same protocol briefings for weeks. "We're receiving the final approach vectors from the Zephyrian Advance Fleet. Queen Lyralei's personal transport will dock at Base 7 in approximately 72 hours. Rodriguez nodded, though the gesture felt hollow. 72 hours until humanity's first formal diplomatic contact with a species that reportedly possessed psychic abilities capable of reading minds across solar systems. The briefing files made for interesting bedtime reading, assuming one enjoyed nightmares about accidentally thinking inappropriate thoughts in the presence of telepathic royalty. Down in Security Section C, Sergeant Jake Morrison was having his own philosophical moment while attempting to explain to his partner why he'd brought a deck of playing cards to what was essentially humanity's most important diplomatic mission in history. "Look, Rodriguez," Jake said, shuffling the worn cards with practiced ease. "I figure if this alien queen can really read minds like they say, she'll probably appreciate someone thinking about something other than how terrified they are. Besides, poker's a universal language, right? Math, probability, the ancient art of bluffing. What could be more diplomatic than that?" Security Chief Martinez, a man whose idea of humor typically involved reading regulation manuals aloud, actually cracked a smile. "Morrison, you realize we're not hosting a casino night. This is first contact with an interstellar empire." "Yeah, but think about it," Jake continued, dealing imaginary hands to imaginary players. "Everyone's so wound up about protocols and proper etiquette, they're forgetting these are just people. Well, alien people, but still people. They probably put their pants on one leg at a time, assuming they wear pants. Do aliens wear pants? That wasn't covered in the briefings." The question hung in the air with surprising philosophical weight. Martinez found himself genuinely considering the trouser preferences of extraterrestrial royalty, which was either a sign of Jake's peculiar wisdom or evidence that the pre-contact stress was affecting everyone's mental faculties. In the ship's diplomatic quarters, Ambassador Sarah Chen was experiencing her own crisis of confidence while reviewing cultural sensitivity reports that seemed to contradict each other with impressive consistency. One xenoanthropologist insisted that direct eye contact with Zephyrians was a sign of respect. Another warned that sustained eye contact could be interpreted as a challenge to royal authority. A third report suggested that the entire concept of visual communication might be irrelevant given their telepathic abilities, which led to the unsettling question of whether thinking about not making eye contact was somehow worse than actually not making eye contact. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to her aide, a young diplomat named Peters who had the unfortunate habit of taking detailed notes on everything, including Chen's moments of existential doubt. "We're approaching this like they're some kind of mystical beings instead of the leaders of a spacefaring civilization. They have faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, and diplomatic protocols sophisticated enough to arrange this meeting. They're not going to declare war because someone uses the wrong fork at dinner." Peters looked up from his tablet. "Actually, Ambassador, there was an incident on Kepler Prime where improper utensil usage during a trade negotiation led to a 3-year embargo." Chen stared at him with the particular expression reserved for people who share unhelpful information at exactly the wrong moment. Peters, I'm going to need you to stop reading historical precedents aloud. It's not helping my confidence levels. The ship's mess hall had become an unofficial gathering place for nervous speculation, with crew members from various departments sharing increasingly elaborate theories about what first contact might entail. Chief Engineer Patel insisted that any species advanced enough for interstellar travel would obviously appreciate good technical discussions about quantum field manipulation. Dr. Sarah Kim from the Xenobiology Department maintained that biological compatibility studies would be the primary concern. Ensign Murphy from Navigation believed the whole thing would revolve around stellar cartography and trade route negotiations. Jake wandered into this intellectual free-for-all carrying a cup of coffee that had achieved the perfect balance between liquid and sludge, a delicate equilibrium that required precisely 17 minutes in the ship's recycling system. You know what I think? He announced to no one in particular, settling into an empty chair with the casual confidence of someone whose opinion had not been specifically requested. I think we're all overthinking this. They're probably just as nervous as we are. I mean, think about it. When was the last time they had to deal with humans? Never, that's when. For all they know, we might be the weird ones. Chief Patel raised an eyebrow. Morrison, they're a telepathic species with psychic abilities that allegedly allow them to influence matter at the molecular level. We're concerned about proper dinner conversation. Exactly, Jake said, pointing his coffee cup in a gesture that somehow managed to be both emphatic and slightly threatening. We're worried about small talk, and they're probably wondering if we'll try to communicate by rearranging our molecules or something equally ridiculous. It's like two people meeting for the first time, each convinced the other one knows some secret handshake. The analogy was simple enough to be either profound or completely absurd, which seemed to capture the essence of their situation perfectly. The conversation continued around him, but Jake found his attention drifting to the viewport where stars wheeled past in their ancient patterns, utterly indifferent to the diplomatic anxiety currently consuming the Concordia's crew. Somewhere out there, Queen Lyrale of the Zephyrian Empire was presumably having her own preparations for this historic meeting. Jake wondered if alien royalty suffered from pre-meeting jitters, or if telepathic abilities came with some kind of natural confidence booster. Did she practice conversation starters in the mirror? Did aliens have mirrors? Another question that hadn't been covered in the briefings. 3 days until first contact, and Jake Morrison was possibly the only person aboard who was looking forward to it. The docking clamps engaged with a resonant thrum that vibrated through the Concordia S hull, announcing the arrival of Queen Lyrale's transport vessel with all the subtlety of a small earthquake. Jake Morrison felt the vibration through his boots as he stood in the security checkpoint outside Bay 7, watching his colleagues transform into increasingly rigid versions of themselves with each passing minute. Remember, no sudden movements, Security Chief Martinez whispered for the 7th time in 10 minutes, apparently under the impression that repetition would somehow make the advice more useful. And whatever you do, don't think about anything inappropriate. Jake tilted his head thoughtfully. Chief, telling someone not to think about something inappropriate is pretty much guaranteeing they'll think about something inappropriate. It's like saying, don't think about purple elephants. Now everyone's thinking about purple elephants. The security team exchanged nervous glances, and Jake could practically see the mental images of purple elephants propagating through their mind like a cognitive virus. Martinez rubbed his temples with the expression of a man reconsidering his career choices. Through the reinforced viewing port, they could see the Zephyrian transport, a vessel that seemed to have been designed by someone who believed that spaceships should look like crystalline sculptures rather than functional machinery. Its surface rippled with patterns of light that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury, creating an effect that was either breathtakingly beautiful or mildly nauseating, depending on how long you stared at it. Atmospheric pressure equalized, came the announcement from the bay control room. Docking seal confirmed, beginning cultural contamination protocols. Jake snorted. Cultural contamination protocols. What are we, a disease? Morrison, Martinez said with the patience of a man explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow child. This is standard procedure for first contact situations. We're following established xenodiplomacy guidelines. Right, because we have so much experience with xenodiplomacy, Jake replied, adjusting his sidearm with the casual indifference of someone who'd been carrying the same equipment for 6 years. I'm pretty sure those guidelines were written by people who have never actually met an alien. The transport's boarding ramp descended with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, and suddenly the casual banter died as every person in the corridor found themselves holding their breath. Ambassador Chen appeared at Jake's shoulder, having materialized from wherever diplomats lurked before important moments, her formal dress uniform pressed to mathematical perfection. Remember, she murmured to the assembled reception committee, Queen Lyrale is reportedly sensitive to emotional states. Try to project calm, professional confidence. Jake glanced around at the collection of sweating, fidgeting, clearly terrified diplomatic personnel, and wondered if anyone had bothered to define what calm professional confidence actually looked like. To his untrained eye, the group resembled nothing so much as a collection of actors who'd forgotten their lines just before curtain call. The first figure to emerge from the transport was clearly not the queen, unless Zephyrian royalty favored practical gray uniforms and carried what appeared to be the alien equivalent of a clipboard. The being moved with purpose, scanning the reception area with eyes that held the universal expression of someone checking items off a list. Advanced security, whispered Dr. Kim from the xenobiology team, as if announcing the obvious would somehow make her feel more useful. More figures emerged, tall, elegant beings whose movements carried an almost liquid grace. Their clothing seemed to shift and flow with each step, as if the fabric itself were alive and responding to their movements. But it was their ears that drew immediate attention, long, elegantly pointed, sweeping upward and back in graceful curves that somehow made human ears seem like crude afterthoughts. They're beautiful, someone whispered, and Jake had to agree. There was something about their proportions, their movements, their very presence that seemed to have been designed by an artist rather than evolution. Then Queen Lyrale herself appeared, and the collective intake of breath from the reception committee was audible even over the humming of the ship systems. She moved like music made manifest, each step flowing seamlessly into the next, her presence filling the space around her with an almost tangible sense of authority. Her ears were the most magnificent of all, long and graceful, tapering to delicate points that curved backward like the wings of some mythical creature. What struck Jake most immediately was not her otherworldly beauty or her regal bearing, but the way everyone around her seemed to maintain a careful distance, as if she were surrounded by an invisible barrier that no one dared cross. Her own people, her guards, even her advisors, all of them maintained a respectful space. The Concordia *S main dining hall had been transformed into something that resembled a cross between a formal state dinner and a carefully orchestrated psychological experiment. Long tables stretched across the space in perfect geometric patterns, each place setting measured to diplomatic specifications that probably existed in some manual Jake had never read and never intended to read. The lighting had been adjusted to what the xenobiology team called culturally neutral illumination, which meant everything looked slightly blue and made the food appear even less appetizing than usual. Jake stood at the entrance, balancing his meal tray with practiced ease, while surveying what could only be described as the most elaborate display of social anxiety he'd ever witnessed. 300 beings from dozens of different species, all carefully arranged according to some incomprehensible protocol that ensured maximum awkwardness for everyone involved. Morrison, Chief Martinez, appeared at his elbow, speaking in the hushed tones people usually reserved for libraries or funeral homes. Remember what we discussed about appropriate dinner conversation? You mean the part where I'm not supposed to ask if aliens use toilet paper, or the part where I shouldn't wonder aloud about their mating rituals? Martinez closed his eyes with the expression of a man who just realized his life insurance premiums weren't nearly high enough. Both, definitely both, and anything else that involves bodily functions or reproduction. Jake nodded seriously. Got it. No biology, no bathroom humor. What about asking if they play sports? That seems safe enough. Morrison, their idea of sports might involve psychic combat or ritualistic dismemberment. Nothing is safe. Across the dining hall, Queen Lirelei sat at the head table in magnificent isolation, a perfect circle of empty chairs surrounding her like she was radioactive. Her violet eyes swept across the room with what Jake was beginning to recognize as carefully controlled loneliness, watching hundreds of beings who were all desperately pretending not to watch her back. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was probably the most powerful individual in known space, capable of reading thoughts and allegedly moving objects with her mind. And she was sitting alone because everyone was too terrified to ask if she wanted company. It was like watching the universe's most exclusive party where the guest of honor had been quarantined. Jake made his decision with the same careful consideration he usually applied to choosing between different flavors of reconstituted protein, which is to say, none at all. He walked directly across the dining hall, ignoring the subtle increase in ambient tension as conversations died, and 300 pairs of eyes tracked his movement like targeting systems. Mind if I sit here? He asked, settling into the chair directly to Queen Lyrelei's right without waiting for an answer. The acoustics are better over here, and I figured you might want someone to complain about the food with. The silence that followed was so profound that Jake could hear the hum of the ship's quantum drives 3 decks below. Queen Lirelei turned to look at him with an expression that cycled through surprise, amusement, and something that might have been relief. Sergeant Morrison, she said, and there was definite warmth in her musical voice, you continue to exceed expectations. Please join me, though I should warn you that the food aboard your vessel is unique. Jake poked at his dinner with a fork, producing a substance that had the consistency of rubber and the color of disappointment. Yeah, they call it nutritionally optimized protein synthesis. But I think that's just a fancy way of saying we turned perfectly good ingredients into something that makes cardboard look appetizing. Do you folks have real food on your ships, or is terrible space cuisine universal? Our sustenance systems produce meals that are both nutritionally complete and aesthetically pleasing, Queen Lirelei replied, though there was a hint of something in her voice that suggested even alien royalty occasionally had to deal with questionable dining options. Though I confess, the psychological impact of sharing a meal often matters more than its actual composition. Psychological impact, Jake repeated, taking a bite of something that might have been vegetables in a previous life. You mean like how everyone's currently staring at us like we're about to spontaneously combust? Indeed, your colleagues appear to find our interaction unexpected. Jake glanced around the dining hall, noting the way conversations had resumed in carefully modulated tones, while people tried to maintain the appearance of not eavesdropping. They're probably waiting for me to say something stupid and accidentally start an interstellar incident. Fair warning, I say stupid things on a regular basis, so the odds are definitely not in humanity's favor. Queen Lyrelei's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I find your honesty refreshing, Sergeant. Most beings spend considerable effort trying to shield their thoughts from me, which creates a constant background of mental static that can be exhausting. Mental static? Jake asked, genuinely curious. You mean like when you're trying to tune in a radio signal but you keep getting interference from other stations? That is actually a remarkably accurate analogy. Imagine trying to hold a conversation while dozens of people around you are simultaneously whispering their fears, anxieties, and desperate attempts to think only appropriate thoughts. It becomes quite overwhelming. Jake considered this while wrestling with a piece of bread that seemed to be winning the battle. Huh, I never thought about that. Everyone's so worried about you reading their minds that they're probably broadcasting their worries at maximum volume. That's like being afraid of someone overhearing you, so you start shouting about how you don't want them to overhear you. Precisely, though your mind is different, quieter. You seem to think about remarkably mundane things with surprising focus. Currently wondering if this bread is actually bread, or if someone's playing an elaborate prank on the dining staff, Jake admitted. Also questioning whether that thing on my plate that's supposed to be corn actually came from a corn plant, or if it's some kind of alien substitute that corn wishes it could be. Queen Lyrale examined her own meal with newfound interest. The yellow spherical objects do appear to possess an unnaturally uniform geometry for organic matter. Right, corn shouldn't be that perfect. Real corn has personality. Some kernels are bigger, some are smaller, some are probably plotting against the others. This corn looks like it was manufactured in a factory by robots who have never seen actual corn but had it described to them by someone who'd only heard about corn from a friend of a friend. The conversation was so absurdly normal that Jake almost forgot he was discussing agricultural products with an alien queen who could allegedly rearrange matter at the molecular level. Around them, the dining hall had settled into a strange rhythm, other diners stealing glances at their table while trying to maintain their own conversation. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's first dinner with Queen Lyrale, and the Concordia had become an entirely different vessel. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual process of people working up the courage to follow Jake's example, aided by the growing realization that the telepathic alien queen was more interested in learning about human coffee preferences than conquering their minds. Jake sat in his usual spot beside Queen Lyrale in the observation lounge, watching her attempt to master the ancient human art of playing poker with a deck of cards that had seen better decades. Her elegant fingers, so graceful when manipulating quantum field generators, seemed almost comically oversized when trying to shuffle 52 pieces of flimsy cardboard. "I believe your cards are attempting to escape," she said, watching half the deck scatter across the table like fleeing insects. "That's normal," Jake assured her, gathering the wayward cards with practiced ease. "Poker cards are naturally rebellious. It's part of their charm. The trick is to show them who's boss without actually destroying them in the process." Queen Lyrale picked up her cards with the careful concentration of someone performing delicate surgery. "This game makes no logical sense. The numerical values are arbitrary, the suits appear to have no meaningful relationship to each other, and the entire objective seems designed to encourage deception." "Now you're getting it," Jake said, dealing another hand. "Poker isn't about logic, it's about psychology, probability, and the fine art of lying convincingly while maintaining eye contact. But surely your telepathic abilities would make this trivial for you," Chief Engineer Patel said from the next table over, where he'd been attempting to explain quantum mechanics to a Zephyrian physicist who kept pointing out flaws in human theoretical frameworks. Queen Lyrale shook her head, her long ears shifting with the motion in a way that still drew appreciative glances from crew members. "Reading minds during recreational activities would be considered profoundly rude in our culture. It would be like using your ship's tactical scanners to cheat at hide-and-seek. Besides," Jake added, organizing his cards with the casual confidence of someone who'd been hustling poker games since basic training, "half the fun is not knowing what the other person's thinking. It's like Christmas morning, except instead of presents, You're unwrapping other people's bad decisions. Dr. Kim looked up from her tablet, where she'd been documenting cultural exchange observations with the dedication of someone who planned to write the definitive book on human-alien relations. Your Majesty, if you don't mind me asking, what do you think when you look at us? I mean, from a telepathic perspective. Queen Lyreley considered the question while staring at her cards, with the intense focus of someone trying to remember whether a flush beat a straight. Your minds are chaotic but in a fascinating way. Where Zephyrian thoughts tend to flow in organized patterns, human consciousness resembles a storm system, unpredictable, energetic, and occasionally producing unexpected brilliance. So we're basically the mental equivalent of bad weather, Jake said cheerfully. Beautiful bad weather, Queen Lyreley corrected with a smile that had become increasingly common over the past weeks. The kind that produces spectacular sunsets and occasional lightning that illuminates unexpected landscapes. Ambassador Chen entered the lounge carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd just finished the most successful diplomatic negotiation in human history, which, technically, she had. The formal trade agreements had been signed that morning, establishing peaceful relations between the Terran coalition and the Zephyrian Empire, along with technology exchanges that would probably advance human civilization by several centuries. Your Majesty, she said, settling into a nearby chair with obvious relief, the preliminary reports from both our governments are overwhelmingly positive. The cultural exchange program has exceeded all expectations. Indeed, Queen Lyreley replied, still wrestling with her poker hand. Though I suspect the success has less to do with formal protocols and more to do with the remarkable discovery that beings from different species can share terrible food and still find reasons to laugh together. Jake raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. To terrible food and bad jokes, the foundation of all good diplomacy. The gesture was immediately copied by everyone in the lounge, creating an impromptu celebration that would probably never make it into the official diplomatic records, but somehow captured the essence of what had actually happened aboard the Concordia *. Queen Lyreley raised her own cup with fluid grace, her violet eyes sparkling with genuine warmth. There is something I must tell you, she said to Jake as the others returned to their conversations. My government has requested that I invite a human cultural liaison to return with us to the Zephyrian capital, someone who could help bridge the gap between our species and continue the work we've begun here. Jake's cards suddenly seemed much less interesting. That's a big honor. Ambassador Chen would probably be perfect for something like that. Actually, Queen Lyreley said with a smile that suggested she'd been planning this moment for some time, I was hoping to invite you. The poker cards scattered across the table again, though this time it wasn't due to clumsy shuffling. Jake stared at her with the expression of someone who'd just been informed that gravity had decided to work sideways. Me. I'm just a security guard who tells bad jokes and can't even shuffle cards properly. You want someone with actual diplomatic training, not someone whose primary qualification is an unusual tolerance for weird alien food. Sergeant Morrison, Queen Lyreley said, her voice carrying the musical tones that indicated she was being completely serious. In the past 3 weeks, you have accomplished something that centuries of formal diplomatic theory never could. You treated me as a person rather than a collection of abilities and titles. You showed my people that humans are capable of friendship, humor, and genuine curiosity about others. You demonstrated that true communication requires nothing more than the willingness to see beyond differences and find common